Hello, I am John Suresh. I'm the Associate Director of Business and Technology at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Today, we have an exciting event about how governments, businesses, and others are using immersive technologies such as virtual reality and augmented reality, and the policy challenges and opportunities this brings. Over the last year, BPC has partnered with the XR Association to bring together various groups representing a diverse range of viewpoints from civil society, industry, academia, and other stakeholders to explore many of the issues immersive technologies bring through a series of convenings and public events, including this one. Throughout this process, we have had lively discussions on topics including privacy, security, access, and inclusion to figure out the nature of future debates on these topics in the coming years, and we have summarized these discussions in blogs on our website. For today's event, we're going to have opening remarks from the president of the XR Association, Elizabeth Hyman, about a market research study they conducted, separate from their work with BPC, about industry trends in HR in learning and development pertaining to XR. Following her remarks, we will have an expert panel discussing immersive technologies, how they affect the end users, and the policy questions they raise. With that, I want to introduce Elizabeth Hyman, the president of the XR Association. Thank you, Liz.
Great, thanks so much, John. And as John said, I'm Liz Hyman. I'm the CEO and president of the XR Association. We're a nonprofit industry trade association representing the broad ecosystem of the XR industry, which is growing by leaps and bounds every day. And so it's been such a pleasure to partner with you, John, and with the Bipartisan Policy Center. And we're pleased to be here again today for such an important discussion on XR and its application and adoption beyond what most people default right away, which is consumer use and gaming. So really excited to hear from our panelists, because for some time now, the XR Association has been singing from the rooftops about how this technology can be a game changer across many different sectors of our economy. And John, as you mentioned, a couple weeks ago, we held our first annual conference, the Limitless Future Conference, where we focused this year on the learning and development professional, those HR and training officials in companies that are looking for the most effective ways in which to provide training, whether it is for HR type information or detailed and technical training around a particular job. And to coincide with that, we released a study. It's our second year of doing this, a new reality in immersive technology, insights and industry trends. But again, we focused this year on HR and the learning and development professional. And given our topic today, I thought that some of the top line results might tee up our panel conversation really nicely. So this first slide that you're seeing, the top 3 priorities that HR professionals are looking at across many different sectors are upskilling and training. They also are really focused in on finding and securing high quality talent. And thirdly, they're focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. So this was an interesting high-level result from the survey. Also, according to the survey, and forgive the little bouncing bars there, but the transportation and construction industries are leading the way in the adoption of XR technologies, according to our survey. Of the respondents who identified as HR professionals working in transportation and construction, 92% and 91% respectively reported using XR technology. Other sectors like public safety, manufacturing, energy, and healthcare are not far behind. And I'm sure our panelists will have some things to say about that as well. And then finally, I would say there's a significant amount of optimism moving forward. And 81% of these HR professionals use XR as a critical tool for more effective learning outcomes. Interestingly, not on this slide, but only 41% saw this as, in particular, a way to support diversity, equity, and inclusion. But it's interesting to note that 61% believe that it will help them to identify talent across the country rather than localized in their particular area, which is a way of finding and recruiting diverse and inclusive employees. So I thought that might be an interesting little snippet to share at a very high level that might tee up the conversation today with our panelists. So again, John, so grateful. The XR Association has really found this partnership to be very, very informative and deepening our knowledge, collective knowledge about XR and how it's helping across many different parts of our economy and society. So thank you.
Thank you, Liz, and thanks for the presentation. You gave us a lot of information to digest. With that, we will now turn to our expert panel. Given time constraints, I'll be very brief with the introductions. So Carlos Gutierrez is one of our panelists. He's the Deputy Director and General Counsel at LGBT Tech. Our next panelist is Jonathan Beam. He is a Program Manager with US Ignite. So Jonathan Beam. Next is Dave Vasco. Dave Vasco is the Senior Director of Advanced Technology at Rockwell Automation. And last but not least is Tamara Owens. She is the Director of the Simulation and Clinical Skills Center at Howard University. Thank you all for joining us. Before we start taking questions, or asking questions, I want to let the audience know that you will also get a chance to ask questions, and in fact, come up with questions now and try to submit them via the live chat on YouTube, Facebook, or if you're on Twitter, use the hashtag BPC Live. With that, let's begin with the first question. So for all the panelists, can you take a minute or two just to introduce yourself, your organization, and how you became interested in and or use immersive technology? With that, let's start with Dave.
Thank you, John. So Dave Vasco, my organization is Rockwell Automation. We're the world's largest company dedicated solely to industrial information and automation. You may not have heard of us, but we like to say that you probably have used 4 or 5 of the products we help to make by the time you start your job at, be it coffee or breakfast cereal, whatever it may be, things we help to manufacture. I can't remember a time we really weren't interested in immersive technologies. We started researching VR some 25, almost 30 years ago, and to help our users. At that time, you needed supercomputers to achieve mediocre results. Now, for a few $100s, you could buy a headset and you're set, and you have some really great results. So we're really excited about this technology, how it can impact our users. And I think to echo the points that Liz made earlier, upskilling the teams, finding that talent, and again, the DEI, I think there's some excellent opportunities there as well. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Dave. And with that, let's turn it to Tamara to introduce herself and some of the work she's doing.
Thank you so much, John. I am Dr. Tamara Owens, and I, as indicated, the Director of the Simulation and Clinical Skills Center at Howard University. And most don't know that simulation is a part of how we train our healthcare professionals across the spectrum. I'm speaking of medical doctors, pharmacists, nurses, public health officials, dentists. And simulation is used in order to provide enact a real world event, a real clinical event. And so with that, we want to use what's in the clinical spaces. And part of the immersive technology is essential to doing that. I've been in the field since 1997. And so as we have progressed, the state-of-the-art technologies that are available has become more realistic. So we can actually have virtual reality trainers or lifelike simulators and mannequins that resemble what they will engage with in the actual clinical space. They can use the equipment to gain confidence, gain skills, gain knowledge. And so that when they are in the clinical spaces, it's not the first time. They're not hesitant. They have that confidence level and they have the skills to treat the patients. And so my environment just assists them with learning in a space that's safe, that allows them opportunities to practice multiple times, deliberate practice, and then be assessed and get feedback from the clinical faculty and myself. Thank you.
Thanks, Tamara. And let's turn it to Carlos next.
Hi, everyone. Carlos Gutierrez from the LGBT Technology Partnership and Institute. I am the Deputy Director and General Counsel, and we are probably the largest LGBT organization that focuses on the intersection between policy and LGBT tech issues. Our interest in immersive technology comes in many forms, both from the area of challenges and opportunities for immersive technologies to really, really help marginalized communities. We see a lot of potential for LGBT communities with virtual reality and immersive worlds, but we're also well aware of a lot of the challenges that have come before in other forms of technology for marginalized communities. And we want to make sure that the voices from marginalized communities are included in the conversations as we develop guidelines and regulations around these new immersive technologies.
Thank you, Carlos. And let's turn it to Jonathan.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Beam. I'm a program manager with US Ignite, working on our challenge competitions portfolio. I also do a little bit of work with our Smart Bases initiatives. If you haven't heard of us, US Ignite is a nonprofit research organization that was launched at the White House in 2012 with the goal of advancing America's smart city movement. We do this in a few different ways. First and foremost, we focus on advancing connectivity, access to affordable high-speed broadband in America. We received an NSF grant recently to launch Project Overcome to help develop novel solutions for providing broadband access to difficult to connect areas. We also work on advanced infrastructure solutions. So we help to manage a $100 million NSF grant for POWER, our platform for advanced wireless research. We love our acronyms. And finally, and I think most relevant to today's discussion, we have almost 50 communities we partner with, US Ignite communities, cities, states, regions, and we try to help those organizations advance internet-connected solutions to some of their biggest problems. So we host gatherings and trainings. We work one-on-one with these communities to help them develop their technologies. And we're always sort of trying to stay one step ahead of sort of what's coming down the pipeline. So we first got involved with immersive technologies with a public safety challenge that NIST launched a couple years back on using augmented reality to help first responders. And our work has sort of grown since then. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but I'll leave it there for now.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. Let's turn the next question to Dave. So you said you've been working with immersive tech for 25, 30 years. That's much longer than I realized, unless I misheard you. Can you talk about, so one of the things that I often encounter when I talk about, virtual reality, augmented reality, everyone thinks it's about gaming, and they're surprised to learn that actually it has a lot of industrial uses. Throughout your years working with the technology, can you tell us some of the industrial uses you've sort of seen or worked on? Maybe deep dive into one and talk about some of the policy issues that arose, whether it's workforce training or safety or some other issue.
Yeah, John, you're correct. It is 25 or 30 years, but we were actually trying to develop the technology versus supply it in those days. So it has changed. Yeah, in industrial applications, there's so many opportunities to apply these technologies. You think about it, with COVID and so many of the changes we've had, there's restrictions on people traveling. So now if we have technologies that can connect people, you could take the factory environments, bring a headset in, have somebody be able to travel into that environment without actually being there and help. We see a couple primary applications. One is, like Dr. Owens talked about, is the training. These immersive simulation experiences. We're using VR. We create entire factories in virtual reality before they are ever built, before you break any ground. You test it out. You have operators go in there. You learn about how to actually work in this environment. You learn about the workflow. You learn about any kind of bottlenecks that may occur. So you really are able then to transition that to a working factory very, very quickly. The second one is the actual people on the factory. You think about maintenance. Maintenance in some applications, if something's down, it could be $10,000 per minute or more impact to a manufacturing line. So if somebody's able to put a headset on with AR, go up to a piece of equipment, get an expert in their ear and help them to get that going again. Or if they haven't worked on equipment before, get just-in-time training for what they need to be able to solve that problem. So this really has a big impact for industrial environment. And also, I think there's a way of providing more equality for this as well. You think about experts, they no longer have to travel. You don't even need mobility to become an expert. You could be that expert that's sitting at home providing expertise for people that are out on particular production floors solving problems. So we really see it a game changer there. And we're very excited about this technology. And this isn't just research. We've been applying it and actually bringing value to our customers with it.
Thanks, Dave. And I'm going to ask Tamara if you can sort of piggyback on that. So you're one of the people in the healthcare space using sort of immersive technology. And one of the questions I have is, first, how do you determine whether you want to adopt the technologies? Because this is one of the questions people are asking often. Is like, should we use these technologies? What are some of the issues that we might be concerned about? So how do you think about decisions on whether to adopt the technology or not? When you decide to adopt the technology, how do you sort of persuade other stakeholders in the organization to adopt the technology, or sort of like at least consider it? And any lessons based on your work for government agencies or other organizations that might consider adopting immersive technology?
Great question. So when we're thinking about new technologies, I'm always at the conferences. I'm always getting alerts from vendors, and I'm looking for what's the latest and best that I can introduce to my faculty and ultimately the learners to assist them with learning the skills that they need to treat me, you, and your family in those clinical spaces. We want to make sure that they're not using antiquated equipment. So when I see a new technology, I look at it myself and determine, okay, this is something that we need. This is something that that can greatly assist the faculty in teaching skills that our learners need. And so from there, I typically have a demonstration day with the vendor. I have the vendor come on site, and then I invite the faculty. And sometimes, depending on if there's a student interest group, I invite the student, because if I can get interest from the students, they will have that added support I need to ask the faculty to incorporate that into their programs. And so we want to make sure that what we are using is the latest and not past technology. And so I also look at, can I use it across disciplines? That's even an added value if I can use it for multiple disciplines when I bring it on site. One thing that I would tell government entities is that these new technologies are not cheap. And you also must think about not only the cost to acquire it, but the maintenance and support needed to keep it in your center, to keep it with the newest and latest updates. So you have to make sure that you are getting these maintenance agreements to make sure that the equipment, if something breaks, you have to replace it. And most often you can't do those things a la carte. You want to make sure you have the appropriate warranties and maintenance agreements with that. And you need to have a dedicated staff that is there to support the courses when we're using the new technology in the center. Someone who can assist the faculty and the learners with any troubleshooting in real time, and also can communicate back to the vendor and what's going on if we need to send it back. I've had multiple times where I have mannequins in the back of my car, going to FedEx and UPS. So that's just a part of what we do. But you have to think about those things when you're talking about new technology. And also, if you're at an institution, we have limited funding. So the cost of these, they're just increasing. During the pandemic, the cost for software for us to do virtual, I was very much impressed how the vendors reduced cost, so that we were able to acquire these different softwares and virtual reality, augmented realities to use while we were at home. But I now see that costs are going back up. But we have to think about that because we have limited funding. So we have to be very creative with our funding. How are we going to pay for these things? My center acquires a lot because I'm neutral. I'm under the office of the provost. I'm non-discipline specific. So we get funding from the provost to supplement the budget, but it's still limited. So cost, maintenance agreements, thinking about staff support is all things that you should be thinking of when you're wanting to incorporate new technology, and also making sure you get that buy-in from the department, because if they don't want it, they're not going to use it.
Yeah, thanks, Tamara. And you bring up the cost issue. You also bring up sort of engaging different stakeholders. I'm going to sort of bring Carlos into this discussion because he talked about sort of marginalized communities, sort of having a voice at the table. Carlos, industry designs and develops these technological tools and services that impact end users, but also broader society. Sometimes the end users are the only one affected by the technology. What advice do you give industry representatives for developing virtual reality and augmented reality products? And what both opportunities and challenges do you see for fostering equity and inclusion sort of in this context?
Sure. I think one of the easiest things that developers can do is, if you're developing and you're taking equity and inclusion issues seriously, make sure that you're hiring diverse communities and diverse people in your teams. One of the best ways to ensure that your products reflect the communities that you're serving is to make sure that the people that are working on these products reflect the communities that you're serving. And I know that's a bigger challenge. It's not a challenge just in immersive technologies, it's a challenge across all of tech. How do we involve more underrepresented communities into these systems? So one of the first things that we can do is make it a priority to make sure that diverse voices are part of the planning and development of VR and AR products. Another area that we need to look at is kind of, what the ability of these marginalized communities are to take advantage of these products. Like Dr. Tamara Owens mentioned, cost is an issue for even major organizations. So if you're developing products that are being advertised or targeted towards marginalized communities, you have to take a close look at the cost of somebody using those products. Right now, if you're developing a product that's going to be on the Oculus Quest and it's for homeless communities, that's going to be a challenge for a lot of people and a lot of organizations that don't have a huge budget. So taking a look at the economic qualities is one thing. The last thing I think that tech companies have to look at is just the rules of the road for ethics and guidelines cannot be something that they wait for the government or regulations for. We can't wait for the legal environment to dictate how this world is going to look for marginalized communities. We've seen with artificial intelligence, facial recognition, and some of these other technologies that the law often has a hard time catching up to the reality of the inequalities that come up in these issues. Virtual reality and other immersive technologies are a new technology, but a lot of the problems that they're facing are not new problems. We can kind of look at the way social media develops and the problems that social media is dealing with right now to see kind of the problems that we can look for or that we can expect in immersive technologies and get ahead of that. So don't wait for law to dictate the rules of the road. We have to take advantage of the time we have now to develop ethical guidelines that include immersive technologies and include marginalized communities. In terms of opportunities and challenges, as Davis talked about and everyone else mentioned, the opportunities for employment here for marginalized community are incredible. You can now have people in rural communities, or you can have people who are not in traditional tech hubs that can take advantage of this. With training, we can have people employed around the country, and this is a great boon for marginalized communities. These kind of technologies have the ability to bring people together in a way that other technologies don't. And anyone that's been in a VR world knows how realistic that feels, like how quickly you kind of make that connection to the other person's avatar. And it feels like you're having a real conversation with somebody else. And you almost forget that this is not real. So a lot of those challenges are going to be around kind of harassment issues and how do we control some of the issues that have popped up. Economic equality that we talked about, and making sure that marginalized communities have the tools and that they're being provided with training to be able to use these technologies in a proper way. So those are some of the main issues that we talk about.
John, can I piggyback on what Carlos just said?
Yeah, definitely, Tamara.
When we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and you're creating those avatars, make sure there's all skin tones there. That's one of the challenges we found with the software. My IT manager had to be very creative to make sure that it was representative of the global communities that we live in. And so I don't think that's a thought. I think it's the content is they're thinking about how great is this new technology. But if it's not representative of the global community, what we have to now add something to our learning objectives to talk about that. So just make it for all people, be inclusive. Thank you.
Thanks. No, thank you, Tamara. Thank you very much. Anyone else want to piggyback on that, or should we go to the next question? Okay, next question is for you, Jonathan. So you've been partnering with, so you have the Augmented Reality Challenge, I believe it's called. You've been partnering with Facebook Reality Labs and several cities, I believe Raleigh, North Carolina, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Long Beach, California. Can you tell us about sort of this competition, what you learned from it, and any public policy issues that arose, whether it's inclusion, sort of data privacy, safety, that you guys sort of grappled with? So yeah, if that works.
Yeah, it does, John. I guess first I'd like to say I live a few blocks from Howard, so I know the next time I see someone driving around with some mannequins in the back of their car, it might just be Dr. Owens. So that clears up a few next door posts I've been seeing. But we at US Ignite, we're thrilled to partner with Meta now, I guess, with their Facebook Reality Labs to launch 3 augmented reality developer challenges. Like you said, we did it in Long Beach, California, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Raleigh, North Carolina. We offered up a pool of prize money to teams in each of those 3 cities to submit proposals in the first round. We narrowed those down and did a pitch day or challenge day, and selected several winners depending on sort of each city's submissions. Each of the 3 challenges were a bit different from each other. And I think one thing that's really powerful about policy challenges and competitions is that we're sort of application and industry agnostic. So we're often surprised at who participates and also some of the approaches that people take. So, you know, the policy space is really strengthened when we bring more people to the table. And when you offer up cash incentives and new technology, we've been really excited by what we've seen there. So in Long Beach, the applicants focused on exploring the city. It was how can you navigate the physical space, but use AR to learn a bit more about where you are. It was a little bit more playful. We helped residents and visitors better understand the history of Long Beach. So you could look at a building and it would display when it was constructed or more information about it or who's in it. It could point you to new neighborhoods. We had some really great submissions that focused on the effects of climate change on marine life, which, you know, we really were excited to see how it could help both residents and visitors explore how their actions impacted the environment. We saw some similar efforts in Raleigh, where one of the winning applications actually used AR. People could use video of their backyards, and it would suggest plants that they could put in their garden to better combat what the regions face a lot of stormwater runoff and flooding in some creeks. And so it would literally show how water may flow through an area and how you could layer different types of plants to help combat that. So it's just really exciting stuff there. And then finally in Philadelphia, we partnered with SEPTA, the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transit Authority, their WMATA, on using AR to enhance accessibility services. And developers were able to sort of demonstrate use of audio, visual, haptic feedback, like the whole range of things we have on our phones and devices to help people with different disabilities. So we had some really great submissions there. And I think, you know, one exciting takeaway was to see sort of who we could help partner together to learn from. So for instance, like in SEPTA, we were able to bring nonprofit advocates, people from the disability community together with SEPTA and the developers to sort of really focus on what the real problems were. And I think we helped to foster some conversations that maybe weren't happening or weren't happening enough. So we really enjoyed seeing that result. As far as sort of some policy issues, we didn't face as many privacy issues because we used publicly available data and APIs. So we got around that a bit. But I do think that privacy obviously is going to be one of the most important issues. And we've touched on that. We have a civic trust guide that US Ignite published that I think is really helpful on how to communicate sort of the privacy issues here and make sure that, you know, residents and leaders are on board so that when these new technologies are rolled out, that people are ready to trust it.
And on the privacy issue, let's open it up sort of to some of the other people. Tamara, let's do the next question to you. So in healthcare services, you know, privacy is a major issue, and immersive technology brings new sort of challenges with it. With your center, what are some privacy issues that you deal with, and how do you think about them?
That's a great question because with our more advanced technology, they're used more by our residents in training, and they've already graduated medical school and they're in their specialty training, and then our practicing physicians. So the first question I'm always asked is, where is this data going? Because it is, as they're going through the modules and practicing, it is capturing whether or not they're proficient and competent in these different areas. And so I have to be very clear and transparent that the data that we'll be, this is a safe environment first and foremost. All data that's captured here is for teaching and learning purposes. It's not to be shared with the compliance office at the hospital or your supervisors. If you are a learner, resident, you have access to your data, and the faculty supervising you have access. If you're a practicing physician that's coming down just to enhance skills, you're the only one that has access to that information. And of course, myself and my IT manager has full access of all data, but we ensure that it is data that is stayed behind our firewall on the machine, and over time, it is deleted. So it's not kept for an infinite number of years, or even within a year. The next academic year is gone and erased.
Thanks. Does anyone else want to take make a remark regarding privacy? Carlos or Dave?
Yeah, one of the major things for us is privacy, and it is an issue that's followed again from the real world into social media and now into immersive technologies. From our perspective, from marginalized communities, we have concerns kind of around collection of data. That's something that's always kind of been an issue for marginalized communities, and there have been so many examples of improper data collection from marginalized communities and minority communities that there is a sense of mistrust from these communities in terms of the ability of people to keep their data safe and to also use their data in an appropriate way. So privacy is a huge issue for marginalized communities, and also, the vulnerable people that are being kind of the data that's being used from vulnerable communities also has to be protected in a way so that other people don't have access to it to use it in nefarious purposes.
And Dave, I'll let you get a chance to answer the privacy question if you want, but next question is for you, and you can maybe incorporate the privacy question into it. You're a member of the National Institute of Standard and Technology's Visiting Committee on Advanced Technology. Can you tell us about sort of the work you do with this committee, how you guys think about technology, and what if the committee has sort of explored immersive technology and has any thoughts on that?
Oh, sure. So NIST is just remarkable. There's this national treasure. They really deliver a lot of value for the U.S. by actually providing the foundational research in how you measure things. And they look at all kinds of technologies that emerge and the impact of those. The visiting committee is sort of like a board for NIST. It looks at what they're doing, where they're spending the money, the things that could have the impact from that, and the same way you would manage a company where the risk could be. They are looking at immersive technologies at NIST. Some remarkable things happening there, and particularly, you look at the mashups of technology. You have something like a AR or VR, and you add augmented reality to it. Now, all of a sudden, you can not just look at something, but you can recognize something that's there, provide additional information for that. The technologies with wireless technology and cellular technology, being able to provide more information quicker to the person that's down there. The spatial location and the range cameras being able to determine distances and the environment around you and where the hazards may be, or digital twins being able to actually simulate things that are happening. All those are amazing. I'll give you an example, and I think it's a project I think Jonathan had worked on, the first responders. They're doing some remarkable work there. And you look at the VR technologies, and typically VR headsets are probably a magnitude less cost than the AR headsets. The VR technology is 2 to 3 years ahead as far as what they're delivering as far as quality. So one way to address this with first responders, they're doing VR simulations of environments with first responders going into an environment, navigating through a hazardous environment, knowing where the exits are, the people, the ways of getting out, or where your other coworkers are. And they're simulating that all today in VR with the idea of when they go to an AR environment, they'd be able to put these on the first responders entering a building for the first time and having that map of the locations and the other people there. So I think it's an excellent example of how you transition things and be able to use technology that's available today to be able to jumpstart the future.
Thanks, Dave. And Jonathan, since Dave mentioned you, or if you have anything to add on with regards to this, feel free to do so. Otherwise, I can, or you can incorporate to my next question for you. Do you have any lessons from your sort of work on, immersive technology issues and smart cities that you sort of would like to impart on the federal government or at the national level?
Yeah, I mean, I think I take a slightly different approach than Carlos, only in the sense that I think, the dam is about to break on this technology. And I think the only entity that's going to be able to sort of solve some of these privacy challenges is going to be the federal government. I think right now we risk sort of a Wild West 50-state strategy. So, I do think clear-cut rules could be really important. But I think, at the federal level, I think one thing we've really learned is that the biggest thing that we can get here is continued investments to help advance these technologies. A lot of the examples we've heard from the rest of the panel are industry specific, and I think a lot more maybe technically advanced for training and manufacturing. So I would love to see, and US Ignite is advocating for increased funding to provide for challenges in this space. And we've got it looks like some good money coming down with the infrastructure bill through the Department of Transportation. And but I think really it's let's let the innovation flow, and I think we can do that with more funding.
Thanks, Jonathan. And Carlos, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to Jonathan if you want, but I'm also going to wrap it into a question about sort of when designing sort of ethical guidelines and public policy around immersive technology, how can we ensure marginalized communities' views are well represented? Like, do you have a good model of this working well that you think others should adapt? Also, are there any specific issues your organization, LGBT Tech, wants to better highlight in these discussions?
Sure. I actually completely agree with Jonathan that federal regulation is very important and necessary in this area. I think my area of concern is the speed of that legislation coming through. As we've seen, like with AI and with facial recognition and law enforcement use of facial recognition, which is still an unregulated field, and everyone's kind of figuring it out. I don't know that we can wait for the government to kind of start this work. And I think industry is going to have to figure out some of these rules of the road. And I agree with Jonathan that it's not ideal at all. But I also don't think that the government regulation is going to move quickly enough. And we're going to end up in a situation where we are way ahead of regulation, and it may be a little too late to put the brakes on it. So I agree 100% that regulation is important. I just don't know that it's going to happen fast enough. With regards to the marginalized communities being represented in this, I think there's some things that we can do that are easy and not so difficult. One of the things is talking to external civil society groups that do this work. We have blogs on this. We talk to different organizations. There's a lot of other organizations that are doing work on this as well. The Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, Brookings, they all do work on this. So just kind of doing some research and looking at some of what they've published will give industry some ideas of where this is going and what kind of ethical guidelines we can look at. Another thing, again, that we mentioned before is hiring diverse people within your organization as well. Obviously, that will be a lot of help. Tamara mentioned kind of the skin tone issue. If you had somebody in your organization that is of a diverse population, minor population, that's something that's probably going to be highlighted or raised much sooner than if you don't. So the importance of having diverse communities in your organizations as well. Acknowledging kind of the new digital divide that's coming up as a result of this. There's an economic factor here. There's a technology factor. The impact on rural communities or the ability of underserved and rural communities to have access to this tech depends on them having access to broadband. And that alone is already a huge issue. So if you don't have access to broadband, a lot of what we're talking about here doesn't even get off the ground. So acknowledging that there is a digital divide, and when we talk about helping marginalized communities and how this is going to serve, how are we going to get this to them? And that's going to be a big question going forward. I also think there's this concept that we need to talk about, which is kind of XR or immersive technologies for social good as part of the discussions. As we talk about the metaverse, and that's been a huge conversation now, and we see this place where major corporations own this space. where do we make a public space for for nonprofits and other public organizations to live, and how do we ensure that those organizations have a voice, are not going to be behind the walled garden. And then finally, in universal design principles, again, Tamara talked about this, just making sure that the VR and immersive technologies that we're developing are inclusive. They are designed with people with disabilities in mind, people of different backgrounds, people of different sexual orientations and gender identities, that they're all represented. And that brings me to some of the issues that LGBT tech focuses on. And one of the big things that we work on is data privacy, data protection and privacy. So I'll give you a couple examples in the XR world or VR world. What we found, and research shows that people have a greater likelihood of exploring their sexual orientation or gender identity online, and in a VR environment specifically, has proved to be a great place for people to kind of play with their sexual orientation or gender identity. The avatars that you can create obviously can be, gender neutral or completely different genders. You can walk into a space where you know that you're going to be welcome. You can try out kind of this identity that you wouldn't be trying out in real life. But with that comes challenges. So when we talk about data protection, I don't know that an avatar would be seen normally as kind of something that needs to be protected at a higher level as a sensitive data point. But when you have somebody who may not be out in real life, who may be closeted and may be using this as a way to express themselves safely, knowing that they could get fired or kicked out of their home, then their avatar is something that is sensitive data that need additional protection. Another area is just kind of location tracking within a VR environment. So if I'm going to LGBT worlds, I want to know that I can protect that data, and maybe I can turn off my location tracking so that people don't know that I'm going, because I may not want to go. There's other environments that are similarly sensitive. So a lot of the issues that we're seeing are not new issues, but there are new ways to see these issues. So privacy is a big thing for us, and consent as well. And finally, this is not new. It's been around in gaming forever, but harassment and bullying and cyberbullying in VR spaces can be especially damaging. As we know, going into VR reality and into VR worlds, the immersiveness and kind of the contact that you have with people feels very different than a Zoom call. When I'm sitting in a virtual room with somebody and somebody gets very close to me or gets in my space, I feel uncomfortable. And it's this weird dynamic in your head where you're like, no one's sitting next to me, but it's also like this person is sitting very close to me or in my space. So harassment and bullying in a virtual reality and immersive technology world can actually have a much bigger impact than other places. And we need to develop kind of guidelines and rules around how we're going to deal with harassment in these environments, because it's going to be a huge issue for a lot of marginalized communities.
Thank you, Carlos. So we're going to turn to questions soon, audience questions soon. So I want to remind everyone, you can submit your questions using the live chat function on YouTube or Facebook, or on Twitter using the hashtag BPC Live. But before we go to questions, I'm going to ask one more question, or moderator question, to the broader panel. And this is the issue of sort of the workforce. So new technology often impacts the workforce in many interesting ways, many unexpected, unusual ways. So there's sort of the debates around job creation, job destruction, but there's also debates around workforce training. Some of the people on this panel, have people who work very explicitly on immersive tech type jobs. So I wanted to give everyone a chance to sort of comment on this issue of how immersive technology is going to affect the job market, and sort of the skills of the future and the workforce training that sort of immersive technology might incentivize. And with that, let's first turn it to Dave.
Sure. Thank you, John. Yeah, so I think there are some really positive things that can come from this. We see that a lot of these immersive technologies will provide much richer experiences. We see them creating much better jobs, actually providing equity to a lot of people. I'll give you an example. So for manufacturing, to learn about an advanced manufacturing line, we donated a line to a local college, and it's multiple $1 million for robots and linear motors and all these things working together. And there's a handful of students that can use it at once. It's expensive to do something like that. we created a virtual reality version of that. So now people can do that offline. We could have tens of people, hundreds of people going in and using it at the same time, not just how it can be used, but maybe problems that can occur, things that you'd be afraid to do. That same environment now can be shared with other colleges or trade schools to give more people opportunity to actually access that. So that's going to really create more equity within the space to allow those technologies to reach more people. So I think that's something that we're seeing and we're very excited about going forward.
Thanks, Dave. Tamara, do you want to sort of take a stab at the jobs question or the jobs of the
Sure.
future question?
Sure, I agree with Dave. I would encourage having some of those workforce opportunities to train, because what I look for is young individuals who are interested in an entry-level position as a simulation technician. And so with this position, you can learn a variety of things. If they had some basic skills coming in that Dave was just talking about, this will give them a head up in the field where they can go anywhere in this world and be a simulation technician and work their way up, because they're learning about clinical concepts, they're learning about medical equipment, they're being immersed into information technology, audio visual, and a lot of new technology that comes out that we're introducing them to. So I would encourage any opportunities where we can have some skills developed in the community through workforce development, community colleges that focus more on technologies, where young professionals who may not even know anything about it or where they could go, how they can use it, can actually be introduced to it and have an opportunity to have gainful employment.
Thanks, Tamara. Carlos, you want to take a sort of attempt at the jobs question, maybe incorporate what sort of should be done around marginalized community issues, sort of, you mentioned the digital divide, how that's going to affect sort of like the workforce.
Sure. Yeah, I think this is an area that's actually really exciting, like Tamara talked about, for marginalized communities and people, especially in rural communities. For LGBT people, we face higher unemployment and higher poverty than heterosexual people. A lot of it, unfortunately, is due to discrimination, and people are afraid to come out in their jobs. And I think that this gives everyone kind of the opportunity for an equal playing field. So for an LGBT individual in a small rural community that may not have a lot of opportunities, they have the opportunity to be on an equal footing in terms of training for this. Again, we have to acknowledge the digital divide and issues around kind of getting this information to these communities. But I think that there is a great potential for VR and immersive technologies to allow marginalized community individuals to, have training and employment opportunities they wouldn't otherwise have. So it's very exciting, I think, for marginalized communities, the potential here.
Thanks, Carlos. And Jonathan, do you have anything to add, or should we turn to audience questions?
Let's get to the questions. I think everything's been addressed, and I'm not an economist, so we'll leave that for the.
Okay, first question is from Mark Walsh. Who are the players, corporate, NGO, or government, that need to enter this arena to energize its growth and adoption? Colleges, corporations, others. And anyone can take a, attempt at that question.
So, I mean, this Dave, I think that from a college's standpoint, what I'd love to see is more sharing. That we have these rich, immersive experiences, and if we could share these between the colleges, even push some of those down into the high school, would to help jumpstart bringing a lot of the diverse talent into the colleges. I think that's going to be a big start. But I'd love to see everybody take an approach of sharing more of these immersive experiences, and so more people can leverage them.
I can piggyback off of what Dave just said, and that's exactly what we try to do here at my center. In the summer, we have STEM and pipeline programs that we introduce these new technologies to high school students. So we partner with nonprofits. There's also within my institution STEM programs where they bring in high school and college level students and provide them with immersive opportunities that learn medical concepts, whether they want to be a nurse, a dentist, or a pharmacist. And I make sure that they have an experience that gets them excited and they can actually visualize themselves in this career. and we use the technology to do that, because that's something they've never been introduced to before. And it's geared toward students from populations where college is not their first time college, going to college for the first time in their families.
Right, right. Anyone else want to?
Yeah, I would just say, reflecting on the question, all those players you mentioned are already in the arena. They're already there. And I think that's one thing we've seen in these challenges. One of the benefits is bringing them together, because I think one issue is if this develops totally siloed, if you've got your pure tech companies developing the back end, and you've got for-profit companies trying to come up with a niche solution, I think you're missing out on some of the synergies. And so I think it's getting these people together is what's most important. And I think one thing we're excited about with US Ignite is, with increased funding for civic innovation, it's that governments can serve their citizens better if they're at the forefront of this technology. So we're really excited about that. So I would say anything we can do to encourage more cooperation is the best path forward.
Yeah.
And I would just add to that I think a good role that government can play here is kind of ensuring kind of the public policy issues around marginalized communities or those people who are not at the table, and making sure that those voices are included as well.
Thanks. All right, next question is, I think, a two-part question from Hanadi Jordan. How can people worried about their privacy give meaningful consent to data collection using VR? And are there any current federal or state laws that discourage the use of XR technology? Okay, so let's make that a broader question about, so the issue of meaningful consent often comes up in the privacy debate. So how should we think about that? And are there any existing laws that we should sort of be thinking about in the context of many of the issues we've discussed? And anyone can take that question.
I think what I will say is that I don't think we have to start from scratch here with privacy laws. A lot of the privacy laws that are on the books now are something that can be adapted. We do have a starting framework. It would be great to have a federal law that covers privacy. Again, this is a whole other panel,
yeah,
but it expands here. And I think we do have kind of a framework. We have civil rights laws. We have privacy laws on the books on the state level. California and other states have passed laws that can be looked at for examples. So yeah, we need to kind of make sure that when these laws are being considered going forward, that they are broad enough to cover immersive technologies. But yeah, a federal privacy law that covers immersive technologies is something that I think everyone would, I don't know if everyone would welcome, but we would welcome in terms of being able to have a conversation and setting a floor across the country of knowing what the minimum is that that's going to be covered across all technologies and all companies.
And on the education side, we have a federal laws, the federal education rights. Students have the right to determine who have access to their data. And so that's what we stand on in terms of our simulation and use of the data that we collect with the new technology.
Thanks. Anyone else, or should we move on to the last audience question?
Well, just to build on what Carlos said, I think there are existing laws, and that's really the key. We have to be careful. We don't want to develop laws specific to technologies that are rapidly developing.
Right.
So focus on the outcomes. What are we trying to do from an outcome? And there's many of these laws are there today. Maybe they need to be extended as the technologies make it more a probability, but build upon those. And then second, make sure that people understand the technologies they're developing to better understand things like artificial intelligence, more explainable AI things, so you can understand what the possible outcomes would be. So good guidelines to better understand, and then leverage the existing laws versus trying to make technology specific laws.
Great. I'm going to turn to the last audience question before I give everyone a chance to make sort of concluding remarks. So last question is from Nick Gondik. What technical challenges need to be overcome to ensure that immersive tech benefits are broadly distributed across urban/rural communities? Curious about internet speed and cloud edge computation. So anyone want to take that and Yeah, I think, Dave, maybe you have quite a bit of technical expertise. So having worked on the technology over 25, 30 years, so maybe I'll see if you want to take the first attempt at that question.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, the universal broadband is going to be key. I mean, if we don't have broadband access or high-speed access, and the cellular as it emerges out, and we're seeing some more with 5G, and as the different versions evolve, we're going to see that roll out. But that's going to be key. We need to have those as the baseline so everybody can be part of this. As far as the edge processing, we're seeing it today that the processing power that's going into these devices is becoming much, much better. The storage that's in these devices is better. So you're actually able to take and minimize some of the disruptions that could occur with communications that are marginal by pushing more of the environment and the storage into these devices. You're not constantly relying on this real-time stream. But yeah, I think the universal broadband is really the key here.
Great. Anyone else? Or should we turn to concluding remarks? Okay, with that, I'm going to give everyone a chance to sort of give concluding remarks. Take 30 seconds to a minute to give just general thoughts you want to express based on sort of our discussion today. I'll turn it to Jonathan Beam first.
Sure. Well, thanks, John, and for the Bipartisan Policy Center for having us all today. This was a wonderful discussion. I just hope that I was able to impart sort of the exciting work we've been doing when we work with city leaders and, sort of at the local level to develop these technologies. I think it opens up a whole new range of solutions for civic leaders engaging directly with their citizens. And if you're watching this and want to get involved, Jonathan Beam on LinkedIn, and you can find me there. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Tamara, do you want to go next?
Sure. Again, thank you for having me today and allow me to speak about a passion of mine, which is simulation and healthcare education. I hope that I was able to convey how technology is being used to train the healthcare professionals of the future. They are immersed with the latest technology, not only at my university, but at many of the universities in your community. So if you're not familiar with simulation, please connect with them. They will be more than happy to provide you with their tour. And if you're in the DC area, I'll be happy to provide you with a tour. But what I really want you to understand is that the physicians are being trained. Their skill sets are being developed. And so that when you are in your next office visit with a doctor, you can be certain that they have trained on new technology that's being put out there. And if there's any way we can look at the cost of these new technologies that are coming out and help institutions be able to acquire it, particularly our HBCUs who typically have less funding, I would be happy to be a part of those conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tamara. Dave, do you want to go next?
Sure. I want to thank the panelists. This has been really, really fun to listen to the different approaches. I mean, Jonathan, the things you're doing at US Ignite, I think just are amazing. Dr. Owens, I mean, the simulation for the healthcare and being able to put people environments and, like you said, pushing it into the high schools and giving people experience they never would have had. And Carlos, boy, I love the ideas you brought forth as far as the avatars and using those to be able to maybe bring in a gender neutral way of interacting with people that people maybe never had before, and bringing more people into tech that maybe wouldn't have necessarily considered those careers. So this has been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much, John, for being part of this.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it. And Carlos, we'll give you the last word.
Sure, thank you. And thank you for hosting this. It was fantastic. I think what I would say is that a lot of these issues are on marginalized communities, and these discussions may seem very big, but I think that there are a lot of resources out there that are actually pretty accessible. Talk to civil society groups. We're happy to talk to anyone, anytime. There's a lot of other groups like ours that are engaging in these conversations. So I think these conversations actually can be easier and can be a lot more productive than people imagine. So reach out, do a little research, and don't be afraid to contact people that you think might have ideas that are useful for you.
Thank you, Carlos. And I want to say this has been a fascinating discussion for myself. I've learned a lot, and great to hear these diverse perspectives of how sort of people see these new technologies. So thank you to our panelists. I also want to thank a few people that made this event possible. Anna Fridley and Mary Margaret from BPC. This event wouldn't be possible without their help. Our vendors have been very helpful sort of setting this up. There's a lot of stuff that goes behind the scenes. I want to thank the XR Association and Elizabeth for sort of making her remarks earlier today. And I want to thank everyone in the audience for watching and people who submitted questions. Great questions, helped add an extra layer to the conversation. With that, I want to close this event. Thank you all for joining, and hopefully we can see you next time.